In this section, we're going to talk about analyzing and adapting to your audience. This is found in Chapter 5 of the Public Speaking Playbook. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of always considering your audience. When we think about communication, and this applies whether we're talking about public speaking or we're just having a conversation with someone, there is the speaker and there is the person listening. If the speaker cannot think about what the listener needs in order to understand their message, you're never going to have effective speaking. And so it's very important that we learn about adapting to the audience. So you need to kind of think about, how am I going to reach them? How am I going to influence them, motivate them, teach them, entertain them? These are all things you need to think about as you're preparing a speech. Aristotle, who is considered kind of the father of rhetoric, the father of public speaking, said of the three elements in speech making, the speaker, the subject or what you're talking about, and the person addressed or the listener, it's the last one, the listener, that determines the speech's end and object. If you cannot influence the person who's listening, it doesn't matter what you're really telling them. And so I cannot emphasize enough the importance of thinking of your audience at all points as you're creating your speech. Okay, so how do we do that? There's something we can do called an audience analysis. Now, this is not something that I'm going to require you to do for this class, but you could try to gather as much information about your audience as you can. Now, we're going to do that a little bit. That's pretty much the point of doing the introductory speeches. It gives us an opportunity to learn a little bit about our audience. In an effective speaking class at any college campus, you're going to have a diverse array of students, and that is particularly true here at HAC because we have a very diverse student body. If we were to go to a four-year school where, everybody's taking public speaking as a freshman, then you'd have a lot of, 18 and 19-year-olds sitting in your class with probably some similar background experiences. So we do the introductory speech in order to understand a little bit about our audience. Now, depending on what we know about our audience, we are going to adapt our message. So let's consider that, let's say that I am a political candidate and I am going to go deliver a speech and I'm talking to a group of senior citizens. I'm going to think about, well, what are these people interested in? What are the concerns that they have? How do I need to frame my message if I am going to talk to a group of senior citizens? And versus if I am, going and talking to a civic club, or I'm going and talking to, the county's Republican committee or the county's Democratic committee. Depending on who the audience is, I'm going to adapt my message differently. Now, some people may say, well, that's being deceptive. You're just telling people what they want to hear. That's not what we want to do, but we do want to always consider, what do I need to do in order to get my message across to my audience? So, one, we consider the audience's makeup. So, there are individual differences. There are different characteristics we can look at. How much do you and the audience members have in common? If you have a lot in common, you can craft your message a certain way. If you don't have a lot in common, you may have to do that a little bit differently. Reach out to your audience and be audience centered. If you center attention on your audience members, they will make you the center of their attention. Effective speakers are going to select topics based on, one, their expertise and interest, but also considering, what does the audience need or want in order to be able to listen. In this class, you're going to be able to choose the topic for your speeches, and I tell students all the time, that's a great freedom that you have to do that, but with that comes great responsibility. I had a student once who wanted to do a speech about Aquaman. I said, okay. So we asked in the class, how many of you think Aquaman's the best superhero? Nobody raised their hand. Okay, how many of you have heard of Aquaman? Well, only actually a few people raised their hand. And then I was talking about Aquaman. Now I was a lot older than this student. I said, well, yeah, he rode dolphins. And the student said, no, he didn't. And I said, no, really, he did. And so I found an old episode of the Justice League and showed him what Aquaman was like when I watched him in the 70s. So the point being that speaker who was choosing a topic of Aquaman, who he was perfectly fine to choose that, had a huge responsibility to make sure that that speech was adapted so that it would be audience centered so that it would be interesting to his audience. Because if it's not interesting to your audience, you're not going to have an effective speech. So, who are you speaking to? How do they feel about my topic? What would they like me to share with them? These are all things that you could ask if we were doing an audience analysis, that you could kind of get a gauge. For students who take this class in a blended and in a virtual format, which if you're listening to this, you probably do. This is something that happens with the discussion. We have a discussion question about your informative topic. And so you're going to get some feedback about that. And so you'll be able to gauge, oh, okay, people are interested in this or people are interested in that. Now, that doesn't mean you have to pick what they say, but it does give you some information. All right. What do they know? What do they need to know? If I'm talking to a group that already has a bit of an understanding, let's say that I want to do a speech and it's about something medical, and I'm doing this presentation in one of my nursing classes, I can use terminology that those people might know. If I took that same topic and I tried to do the same type of speech in my effective speaking class where there might not be any nursing students, I may have to change the words or maybe define things a little bit differently, maybe simplify. So same topic, but I need to adapt it to the audience that I'm speaking to. Okay, when we're looking at doing an audience analysis, and I'm going to go through this even though we're not necessarily doing this in a formal level in this class, we can look at this from different things. We can look at demographic profile, we can look at a psychographic profile, and of course we always want to consider the speaking situation. So what is a demographic snapshot? We can have a homogeneous audience. This is people who are similar in age, they possess other similarities. If we have an audience that has a lot of similarities, especially a lot of similarities to us, there are certain ways we can adapt our message. However, if we have a heterogeneous audience, this is where people come from different ages, different life experiences, maybe different cultures, then we need to think about how we need to shape our message for that heterogeneous audience. A successful speaker will embrace diversity when speaking to a heterogeneous audience. They're not going to assume that they have all the answers, and they're going to think about, well, what might I need to do for this audience? I will often have speakers, and a topic that actually usually works very well, especially with international students, is something about their country of origin. And I have found that they're pretty good about thinking about, okay, I'm talking to an audience who has not lived in this country or who has not visited this country. So what do I need to tell them? How do I need to adapt my message because of that? Okay, so demographics, age, gender, sexual orientation, education, and knowledge levels. Again, the more your audience knows about your subject, the more kind of in depth you can probably get. Socioeconomic background. These are all demographic factors. Now we could also look at oh my goodness, psychographic snapshot. A psychographics describes how members view themselves, your attitudes towards the speaker, the occasion. It includes people's values, their beliefs, their attitudes. This is going to be important when we're looking at persuasive speaking, because with an informative speech, you're just the teacher. You're not taking a position on something, you're giving us information. With a persuasive speech, you are really trying to tie into our values, our beliefs, our attitudes, and getting us to think a little differently, do something that maybe we weren't doing before, or to believe something a little bit differently. So it's important to have an idea, if you're trying to influence an audience, of where they are, because if you don't know where they are, you're not going to be able to move them to where you want them to be. And finally, we have demographics, we have psychographics, and then we want to, of course, consider the speaking situation. Why is the audience here? What is the physical setting? What are any obstacles? When we're in a classroom, we have to think about those kind of things. Time, how much time do you have? When a speech is, 7 to 10 minutes, if you're still talking at 12 minutes, your audience is not going to like you very much. So you want to think about how much time. Also, how large is the audience? These are all things to think about when you're creating your speech. So, how do you get information about the audience? Well, in this class, we kind of are getting information through the introductory speech. You're kind of stuck with each other in class together. But if that was not the case, what you would want to do is ask your contact people, hey, who am I going to be talking to? Can you tell me a little bit about the people that might be there? Use your own personal knowledge and observation. And of course, you can ask questions. You can survey your audience before you speak. Okay, so just to summarize from chapter 5, reaching out to your audience, getting some of that preliminary information, thinking about the demographic makeup of your audience, the psychographic makeup of your audience. What's the situation? Getting that information about the audience. Remember, the most important thing to consider when developing your speech is your audience.